Today I'm looking at this old Radio Shack digital multimeter. This thing is a model number 22-178 as shown on the label back here. And you can see that the unit is powered up and it does seem to work. However, what you can probably see in the camera is that some of the LCD segments are not lighting up. And in fact, it looks better in the camera than it does in actual real life. Some of these are a lot dimmer than the camera makes them out to look. So what I'm going to try and do is see if I can fix that. I'm guessing there's one of those rubber LCD contact things that are in there that's got some oxidation or something like that. So in order to take this thing apart to start looking at it, there's one screw on the back down here, and that's a Phillips screw, but I'm using a small flathead screwdriver to take that apart. So we'll just pull this off and set it aside. This also had this rubber case that went around it that I've already removed. Okay, so once inside the unit, you can see where the two AA batteries are, and all the components and things there in the main circuit board. So I'll remove these batteries and set them aside. And then I'll take a look. What I'm noticing is that there are no screws holding on the circuit board itself. It looks like the circuit board is just held in by plastic tabs molded into the case that just probably need to be pushed out of the way, and then the board pried up. So with that out of the way, this just all comes up, and you can see there are some wires there with a small piezo buzzer attached to the case, and that looks like it's molded on. I think some gentle prying will get that off. There. You can see there's just two holes in the piezo, and then there were some pegs in the case, molded into the case. And this spring here is loose, so I don't want to lose that. So I'm going to set this thing aside. So here's the main board. I want to be careful this piezo doesn't fall off, but what I'm interested in now is the LCD display. You can see that it's held on with this clear plastic shroud, and just like the board is clipped into the housing, the clear plastic shroud is just clipped onto the board with some tabs, which I should be able to just kind of move out of the way. And as I started to pry that apart, it felt like there might have been a slight amount of adhesive on there too. But as I pry that away, you should be able to see up here, I'm not sure if I'm able to show it at the right angle, maybe if I can turn it around, you can see there's some fingers on the circuit board up here, and these are what mate with this rubber strip, this contact strip that also mates to the LCD. And I believe that's what's failing on this thing. You can see that there's some shiny spots on these pads here, but they're kind of crusted over and probably not making solid contact. In fact, there's even some sort of hair or whisker of tin or something there. So I'm going to finish taking this all the way off. Yeah, now you can definitely see, if I can get it in the shot, I'll turn it right upside down and get it close. If I can get the camera to focus on that, you can see the ends of those pads are pretty shiny, but there's some crusty stuff going on in there, and I'm sure that's part of the problem. So I'll set that aside for the moment. And you can also see the LCD there, that this rubber contact strip is also kind of crusty and musty. So I think we need to clean this up. Okay, just to try and show a little bit of a closer look at the circuit board, you can see here that it looks like there's actual solder mask material that's kind of bridging over this thing. And then over here on this side, the pads are maybe even corroded a little bit. So I'm going to work on this a little bit and see if I can scrape some of this away without damaging the pads. I'll also put a little alcohol in there and see if that'll clean up some of the crustiness. Okay, I don't have any Q-tips handy, so I'm just going to try and use a rag with some alcohol on it to try and help clean some of this up. And you can see some of it seems to be coming up, so I'm just going to work on it with the alcohol. The other trick that I'm going to do is you can use a pencil eraser to kind of gently work at some of the corrosion, and that'll kind of help clean off some of the oxidation as well. So I'm going to work on that a bit and then see how well I can get it cleaned up. Okay, you should be able to see there that I've got the pads fairly well cleaned up. You may be able to see that a few of the pads are a little bit kind of corroded off. This one in particular, and then a couple of the ones down here have some pitting and are kind of chewed up. What I found out is what was on these pads was battery acid. The AA battery compartment is directly on the other side of here, and I'm assuming that the previous owner left the batteries in this thing too long, and they leaked, and the chemicals leaked through these slots in the board onto the pads and started to cause the connection problems. So the pads aren't perfect, but I'm hoping there's enough left of each of these pads to make connection to the rubber contact strip on the LCD. Okay, here's the back of the LCD with the rubber contact strip, and you can see some of the green battery corrosion along here. Hopefully it hasn't damaged the contacts any. I'm going to see if I can clean these up the same way that I did the pads. A little alcohol, the rag, and the pencil eraser. And here's the LCD with the rubber contact strip cleaned up about as best as I'm going to get it. Hopefully I haven't damaged anything in the process, but I think I've got all of the green gook off of there now. And now I'll try and put it back together and see if it all works. Okay, so now I'll try putting this back together. And you can see on the back of the LCD screen I've got a couple of pieces of capped on tape to kind of hold that back in place. There were some pieces of just regular cellophane tape that were on there that between the age and the alcohol that I've put on there kind of got rid of what was left of the adhesive. So I've replaced that with some capped on tape to hold everything in place, and I'll just snap this back in here now. And I want to be careful because if I break those tabs, that's the end of the unit most likely. Okay, so with that snapped back in, everything feels tight. Before I actually put this back in the case, I think what I'm going to do is try and throw the batteries in and see if everything is working. So I'll power it up. Okay, so it's not perfect, but it's getting better. Okay, batteries in there are a little bit loose. And in the camera, you may be able to see a couple of the segments are kind of dim, but they're all sort of working now. It's better than it was, but it looks like it needs a little more work. So I'm going to pull this off again and give it another try. Okay, so I'm just going to go back over this thing again with the pencil eraser just like this and keep working at it. I thought I had it fairly clean, but maybe it wasn't quite clean enough. Of course, these rubber contact strips are kind of questionable in the first place, so it could just be kind of what it is. I might not be able to do much more with it. And in fact, in looking at it closely with a loop, I can see that there's little cracks and stuff in there. So I mean, that could be part of the problem, that the corrosion just kind of ate away too much at it, and you know, no matter how much I clean it, it's just not going to make good contact. And also, you know, the pads on this thing are kind of eaten away in some cases too, so that may be some of it. But I'll just go over this one more time with the eraser, get as much junk off as I can, and try and put it back together one more time. Okay, you can see here that I've got the display working more or less properly now. All the segments are lit up and seem to be functional. There's a couple that are maybe slightly dimmer than they might have been when they were new, but everything seems functional with one notable exception, and that is that the low battery indicator seems to always be on. I'm not exactly sure what's going on with that, but I think I'm going to live with it for now. I don't think that's anything that's going to prevent the use of this meter, really. So I'm going to go ahead now and test the meter and see if it's actually working properly now that I can see what's in the display. Actually, before I test it, I'll put the back on it again, and that's just achieved by snapping it back in place and then putting this screw back in, the single screw on the back. Okay, so to kind of just verify this meter now to see if it's working, I'm going to test this 9-volt battery that's right here, and this battery is actually a little bit on the dead side, so it's not going to measure 9 volts, but I'll first start off by measuring it with this fluke meter that I trust. It's not exactly calibrated or anything like that, but I know that it's working more or less correctly, so I'll use that as my standard. And I'll check the battery, and you can see there that it's got 7.25 volts. So I'm assuming that with the Radio Shack meter, I should get something up, you know, fairly close to that. So put these in here, and it's 7.4. So it's off a little bit, but you know, in the ballpark, I guess. Well, we could try another battery and see. I've got another one over here. Let's try that one. And what is that? 7.51 or 7.57. Hard to see in the camera there. So with the Radio Shack meter, I would assume this will read a little high again. And 7.71, yeah, about 0.2 of a volt high. So we know that it's in the ballpark. It may not be perfect, but again, neither one of these meters is calibrated, so it could just as well be the fluke that's off. Now I'll do a simple resistance check, I guess, and see if that part of the meter is functional. Okay, so now the next thing I'll check, just for the heck of it, I've got this 4 ohm resistor here. What is this thing? I'm not sure how many watts this is, but it's a 4 ohm, you know, heavy wattage resistor. And first I'll check it with the fluke meter and see what we get. And what is that looking about? 4.2, 4.1-ish, something like that. Next I'll check that resistor with the Radio Shack meter and see what I end up with. Oops. And that looks, whoops, I guess it's reading about 5 ohms or so. So it's, you know, again, it's not real super accurate. Next up, I'll try and measure this 1K resistor here, and I'll check it again on the fluke first. And you can see there it is just shy of 1K. So it's about 989 ohms or thereabouts. So fairly close on the fluke. And now we'll check the Radio Shack. meter, if I can find the lead here. And, well, that's actually fairly close to the fluke now, 983 or so. You know, an ohm or two at this range really isn't going to matter. So I guess for all intents and purposes, I'd say this meter is working. You know, again, it's a Radio Shack meter. It's not a fluke, so it's bound to be you know, slightly different. And again, I don't know which one of these is really calibrated. The fluke could be off for all I know. But seeing as this old Radio Shack meter is you know, just recently come into my possession and had most likely been sitting around a while since it had all that battery acid in it, I tend to believe the fluke anyway. But anyway, I guess that's going to about do it for this thing. You know, I don't think I'll use this as a primary meter, but it might be a good secondary meter to have on hand, or for rough applications or something like that out in the field. Anyway, you know, as always, thanks for watching, and if you feel like leaving a comment or subscribing, feel free to do so. Thanks.